This morning we got the reveal of the nominees for the Game Awards, and I have some thoughts. I'm not planning on making my way through like every single category and breaking them all down. This is really me just more reacting, talking about the specific categories that I'm particularly passionate about and feel like I will know what I'm talking about. And the first one I want to dive into, just because I think it is like the big obvious talking piece for a lot of people, is Game of the Year. Look, in general, I'm not super big on award shows. It's not even a thing against the Game Awards themselves specifically, it's just the premise of a lot of award ceremonies in general. That said, one thing I think the Game Awards generally does very well is narrowing down those big name games that are pretty much the main hype machines from the year. And with that in mind, yeah, the 6 games they've picked make a lot of sense. There are some things about it that do surprise me, but it's not a lineup that I'm particularly mad about. Really, the biggest thing that I think really took me off guard is the fact that of all the games to not make this list, I really did think Split Fiction was going to be a shoo-in. One, just because the general reception and love for that game earlier this year was pretty strong, and two, the fact that it's coming from the same developers that made It Takes Two, which took Game of the Year back when it came out in 2021. On the flip side, a game that I did not fully expect to see on this list that I am actually kind of pleasantly surprised did is Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Not that I think the game is weak by any means, but just looking at how the general critical reception was for it earlier this year, while very positive, didn't really feel like it had the same kind of energy that we've seen for a couple other releases that have come out. It's something that I think general audiences have made very clear how much they love the game, but I just didn't see it quite as much from the critical space. And in fact, before they officially revealed this lineup, I did do my little bit of guessing on social media as far as, what I thought these 6 games were going to be, and this was the one that I had completely counted out as not thinking it was going to happen, and I was wrong, and I gotta say, kind of pleasantly surprised that I am. And really, the rest of this list makes perfect sense to me. Silksong, Hades 2, and Expedition 33 were all games that I thought were pretty easy shoo-ins, both just based on the general waves they've made and the critical reaction to them. Donkey Kong Bonanza and Death Stranding 2 were 2 other titles that I thought were a pretty safe bet. So yeah, well, I want to just go over some quick thoughts about that particular category. Not one that I actually find all that surprising or throwing me off. It pretty much lines up with what I thought it was going to be. A category that I do feel a bit more thrown off by, and this is not the first year that's happened, Best RPG. Well, I feel like I have fairly diverse tastes. If there's one specific genre I'm going to pick out as like the one I'm focused on, it's RPGs. And there just always seems to be something every year at the Game Awards where a particular game or a certain style of game just ends up going ignored, and we end up with a list that does have some good picks, but doesn't feel entirely quite right to me. The 5 games they ended up going with were Expedition 33 and Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which makes sense. Both those games are also up for Game of the Year. Seems like pretty easy picks. And then Avowed, Outer Worlds 2, and Monster Hunter Wilds. I absolutely love Obsidian. It is one of my favorite developers, and they are one of the teams that I just show up for every purchase. And I'm absolutely happy to see that they are up for the consideration here. Very surprised Avowed is one of them. I like Avowed a lot. I think it's a strong title. I think Outer Worlds 2 is the better of the 2 games they've released this year, however, and there are so many other RPGs that I think honestly kind of deserve the space more. And on a similar token, this is kind of a recurring thing as well. I don't know how I feel about Monster Hunter Wilds being up for Best RPG. Not just simply because Wilds is, I think, one of the more less enthusiastically received Monster Hunter games in recent memory, but also just the fact that I get that it is an action RPG, but if we're going to pick one specific genre for it to be entered in for things like award shows, it makes a lot more sense to me personally that it's, well, an action game first and foremost. Like, yes, there's a heavy focus on gear and trying to get the best equipment you can, but this isn't really a game that's necessarily about making a customized character with a class or a stat system or really even playing a role in a major story. You are repeatedly hunting down monsters to get bigger and better gear to go hunt bigger and better monsters. I think a really good way to illustrate the way I feel about this is the fact that Destiny as a franchise has been considered an action game when it comes to the Game Awards, and as far as I'm concerned, while yes, they are different games in some important ways, the general type of game they are falls under pretty much the same thing. Cooperative action games that are focused on some form of resource grind. Which I will say, the choice of having Monster Hunter in the RPG category is a consistent choice that's been made. Both Monster Hunter Rise and World showed up in Best RPG in the past. It's just not one that really sits well with me, especially with, again, some of the games that weren't talked about for this category this year. I think the biggest one, Trails in the Sky. Does not really make any sense to me that that game is not up for any awards this year. To be perfectly honest, it is a game that I myself have not finished just yet. I have started the remake, and I have a good number of friends that are very into the franchise, and some who are starting the franchise for the first time with this game, and have had nothing but glowing praise, talking about it in the kind of light that it is, one of the best RPGs to come out, period. And so the fact that game is not up for anything at all, especially best RPG of the year, is just so incredibly mind-boggling to me. And there's a couple other games that I feel this way about as well. I honestly think the collection of Dragon Quest 1 and 2 is incredible and deserves to be part of that conversation, which I do get the hesitance that comes with that a little bit because they are remakes. But by that same token, in another category I want to talk about in a bit, Best Sim and Strategy, the Final Fantasy Tactics remake made its way into there. So if that's able to qualify there, I'm not quite sure why something like Dragon Quest was left out when 1 and 2 are just so incredibly good. And then another game that's a personal pick for mine that I also understand would be maybe a little hard to typify which section they would want to put it in, based on where Final Fantasy Tactics is sitting at. This would probably end up in Sim Strategy instead. But 100 Line, one of the most underappreciated games that have come out this year, mixture of tactical RPG and visual novel with branching choice decisions and 100 different endings. It is a massive game in scale that is honestly just incredible, both in terms of its storytelling and the interesting tactical RPG elements that are included. The fact that that game also is just not making an appearance anywhere at the show is just extremely frustrating to me. And I understand to an extent why this happens, because it's just honestly been a historical thing at this point that unless it is a particularly big name legacy JRPG franchise, JRPGs in general just don't get a ton of traction at the Game Awards. Part of this has to do with how relatively niche the JRPG genre is and who exactly is on the voting panel and what games they have firsthand played. And it's the kind of situation where, again, certain big legacy names I think tend to be a pretty safe shoe-in, whether that's Final Fantasy or Persona, or at least Persona-related games. Every now and then you see something like Xenoblade make its way in, but otherwise, if it's any kind of smaller title, or even something that is now as established as Trails, just seems to keep falling by the wayside. And on the same note, I do want to touch on Best Sim Strategy real quick, not because I have any particular grievance with what games are on this list, although I know a few people that are not happy with what is here and what is missing. All I really want to say with this one is, I still don't know why this is a category. It is such a bizarre mishmash that consistently feels like people aren't entirely sure where else they want to put these games, but also don't feel confident enough to give them their own dedicated segments. They just kind of shove them together into one section, because yeah, there are games that I absolutely would typify as both sim and strategy, but when you have them combined like this, you get situations where you have Final Fantasy Tactics Remake, something that honestly probably even deserves more so to be an RPG, because other tactical RPGs have ended up in that category before. But you have it rubbing elbows with things like Civ 7 and 2 Point Museum, which just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. By similar token, the sports section runs into this problem a lot as well, because they go by the idea of it being sports and racing games, which is a very odd catch-all where you get some pretty serious simulation-focused type sports games, and then Sonic Cross Worlds and Mario Kart World, which, sure, yes, they all fall under that title category in a sense, but not really things that actually make sense to put up head-to-head when you think about it. Another category I want to touch on real quick, and this is more kind of just I'm still working my way through how I entirely feel about this, is Indie and Best Debut Indie, primarily in the fact that Expedition 33 is up for both of those things. The indie label in the game space is kind of weird. It doesn't really truly mean the idea of a game that is entirely self-published by the people making it, because there have been plenty of times in the past where a game is heavily celebrated for being independent, when in fact it does have a publisher. Now, I think a distinction that is often made in this scenario is that, yes, an indie game can have a publisher, but it's a publisher that really just helped with the marketing and awareness of the title, and didn't have any kind of direct hands in terms of the creative process of it. Some great examples of this would be things like, say, The Messenger, which was the first big release from Sabotage Studio, and was published by Devolver, but is ultimately an indie game, and really you can apply this to basically every game that Devolver publishes. Or even from a few years back in 2022, Sifu was up for Best Indie Game while it was published by Kepler, the same people who published Expedition 33. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that particular aspect of the definition. I think at the end of the day, especially when these are smaller studios, and it is something where they're still able to make the game they want, and it wasn't something that was a result of, decisions from up on high or any kind of outside influence telling them how the game needed to be shaped or made, I get the idea of keeping those as indie. Where Expedition 33 feels a little weirder is budget. I understand there's this very fun narrative that, Expedition 33 was made by a team of 33 people and they're a brand new studio and look what they were able to accomplish, and I agree, it is an incredible game. It's one of my personal frontrunners for the Game of the Year, but the idea that it was something that was made with just like grit and determination and no resources is kind of wild. While they have not publicly disclosed the budget for this game, it does not exist the way it does because it was made off of just like what scraped earnings people involved were able to get together. I think a really good example for comparison on this is Baldur's Gate 3, a game that, if you want to go with the very literal concept of indie where it is self-published, yeah, Larian self-published that game. That is not something that had the support of a bigger name publisher. They were leveraging an IP that was established and from a major company, but Larian published that game themselves. And that didn't go for any kind of Best Indie Awards that year because it honestly almost seemed kind of comical to, I think, in some people's minds, given the scale and budget and size of it. I think there's this baseline understanding from a lot of people that part of the idea with indie is uplifting and bringing attention to those games that are lower budget, smaller teams. And there are some other big games that I think begin to run away a little bit from that distinction, like, say, Hades 2, a title I absolutely love, and Supergiant Games is one of my favorite devs, but it sometimes feels a bit odd to see it competing in that particular space by this point when they are established as they are. And Expedition 33 is getting that pass this time, which again, I haven't fully worked through my feelings on this. I'm mostly just ranting this out loud right now because it feels weird to me. Another category that's giving me a really big headache with the lineup we've ended up getting is Best Adaptation. Adaptations historically have always been kind of a weird back and forth thing in the gaming space. We've had a lot of really good ones in more recent years, but there is also just that stain a little bit of some that have been not quite as good. And if I'm being honest, this past year wasn't really some of my favorite adaptations, and looking at the specific stuff that's in the lineup right now, none of them are actually things that I actually thought were fantastic or great, and I don't really want to vote for any of them. Meanwhile, two different other projects have been completely left off the map for this. One of them I understand why, even if I disagree, but another one is just mind-boggling to me. Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, that movie came out in 2024, but it came out in December of 2024, which is after the cutoff point for Game Awards, meaning that it is eligible for the following year. And on the one hand, I can understand how that kind of time period can create a bit of a blind spot for some people when considering what things to nominate and vote for in this category, but we have other things in this particular year of awards that did get that kind of attention. Indiana Jones, namely, is a game that came out last December and is in the running for a couple categories, including Best Performance by Troy Baker and Best Action Adventure Game. And in my head, when I look at the lineup of all the other stuff up for Best Adaptation right now, whether it's the Devil May Cry anime, the second season of Last of Us, and really I think more than any of these, the movie adaptation of Until Dawn, it just boggles my mind that Sonic 3 was not considered good enough to stand amongst all these ones when I think it easily clears all of them. The other one that didn't get listed, and again, I get why this happened, but this is just, I'm standing on this hill. The Twisted Metal TV series is actually very good. Maybe not necessarily as a direct adaptation. There are absolutely some very specific choices as far as the tone and style of show that it is, as well as the message they're very clearly pushing as part of it. I don't care. I think it's a very entertaining show that actually found itself a lot more in rhythm with its second season that no one's really giving proper attention to, and I honestly think is better than most of the other stuff that has been nominated for this category. Still, the number one is definitely Sonic 3, and I just don't know how that happened, but here we are. And then not a particular category, but one game I do want to talk about for a little bit as far as just something that isn't anywhere on this list. There's a couple games missing, as I've already said. 100 Light not being anywhere, while it doesn't surprise me as missing, is just really disheartening. Trails, I think, is a massive surprise and something that I know a number of people are definitely going to be angry about. But another one that I kind of get why this happened, but I disagree, Deltarune. I think there's this perception right now that the game is still technically like an early access title because, it did release for sale this year, but we're also only at 4 chapters out of the full set, and there are more that can be releasing in the future. And I kind of get that logic of like waiting till the last episode is released to then be able to count it for everything else. But I don't agree with it, especially when you're looking at the scale of some of these individual episodes and the amount of stuff going into them, at least for some categories, like Best Soundtrack, where every single chapter has been its own massive soundtrack of tracks, dwarfing some other full game releases. I just feel like it absolutely deserves the head nod and mention in some of those categories. If you want to save it for, Game of the Year, Best Indie, stuff like that, sure, fine. But when it comes to, very specific categories, especially score, it honestly just makes no sense to me that we're not talking about it, because that soundtrack is phenomenal. So those are just some of my immediate thoughts and reactions to the nominees we got this morning. I might do like an actual full-blown predictions video down the line where I like pick what I think is going to win every individual category. I will shout out right now, pretty sure Expedition 33 is probably the main thing that has this in the bag. I mean, it has the most nominations out of everything, given 3 of those nominations are all in one single category, which is Best Performance, which is its own very funny thing happening. But based on that and just the general conversation around this game this past year, I would be very surprised to not see it take it. Would not mind if Silksong ended up happening instead. I think that'd be a pretty cool upset. But yeah, pretty sure it's going to be Expedition 33, which I don't entirely disagree with. It's one of my personal favorites, and it's one that I keep debating might be my own personal game of the year. On the other hand, the way some people are talking about how good it is does rub me the wrong way a little bit, because some folks are talking about it like they've never actually watched a movie or read a book before. Like, there's a lot of things that Expedition 33 does, I think, exceedingly well, but it's not a flawless game by any means, and if anything, I hope that lessons are learned from what worked and didn't work in this game so that the next one can be even bigger and better. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's going to end up taking Game of the Year. So yeah, those are just some quick thoughts I wanted to share. Let me know down below what you guys are thinking about the nominees this year. Again, award shows in general, it's just a thing that's always going to be flawed. No one's ever going to be fully happy. It doesn't matter what system is used for picking what is going to be nominated for what. It's just the nature of the beast. But let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button to let me know. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you all later.